Hi everyone, my name's Paul Harris. I'm a research technician for the Center for Water Fish and Landscaping, and we're going to do our best to try to show you grass. So right here we're on our NTEP putting green, and we're at the end of a 5-year study where we've looked at about 20 different varieties of creeping bent grass, and we've monitored these grasses in typical, not high water use, but standard water use, and as well as low water use. So if you were here in person, you could kind of walk through and easily tell which one is which. We see a lot of dry, localized dry spots in this low irrigation, whereas the other half is typical irrigation. And over the course of this study, we've collected data on visual quality, genetic color, those sort of things. And so there's 2 treatments with this study. We're looking at low water applications and typical irrigation applications. And for the most part during this study, we didn't see a whole lot of difference between the 2 applications. We concluded that you can effectively maintain creeping bent grass putting greens with about 60% ET replacement. And what that means is the evapotranspiration that occurs throughout the day. Say we need to replace 1 inch of water, which is a lot. We only need to replace 60% of that, or 0.6 of an inch. So that's what 60% replacement means. And like I said, we didn't see a whole lot of differences between the 2 water treatments until there was some sort of irrigation dry down, or something happened where we weren't able to deliver irrigation properly. And usually that happens when we see like a clogged filter in our system, and so the sprinklers won't run at full capacity, or we have a really windy night, so there's a lot of drift and the water doesn't hit its target like it typically does. In that case, the treatments, the low water treatments, had a longer recovery time. And because it's science and we can't, baby this like we typically would a putting green on the golf course, we kind of just have to let it die and then kind of struggle to let it survive, I guess. So that was the biggest difference between the 2 treatments, is the recovery period whenever we did see some sort of, dry down event, or we had some localized dry spot appear. As far as, spring green up, they were both about the same. They both kind of came out of dormancy at the same time. And usually once cooler temperatures arrived in the fall, in September, October, we would notice that the low water use treatment would kind of catch up to the typical water use treatment. One of the observations that we noticed is just amongst the different cultivars of the creeping bent grass is we have a lot of varieties that are what they call in the industry is kind of improved varieties. So they're kind of bred to have a tighter canopy, so you have less disruption, I guess, as the ball rolls. But those varieties also tend to be a little bit more thatchy. And what we've noticed is these more thatchy varieties, they would be most likely to develop these localized dry spots or hydrophobic areas. And you can tell, we had a dry down event a couple of weeks ago where there's a glitch with the irrigation system and we weren't able to irrigate. And you could almost tell exactly which varieties were affected the most by it. And if you were with me, you could come through and, step on, each one of the varieties, and you can tell which ones are, spongy, what we'd call it, and other ones that are a little bit more firm. And we found that the older varieties that have been around for decades were the ones that were least susceptible for localized dry spot. They were least thatchy. Even though they weren't the prettiest, but they still were able to avoid, too many dead spots from these dry down events. One thing I do want to point out, just the nature of this study. In our other studies, we'll go through and we'll actually kill the edges of the plots with Roundup so we can, keep them from expanding into the other plots. But these ones we put nails in the ground, and that just helps us identify where one variety stops and the other begins. And over the time, we've noticed that the ones that are a little bit, the least competitive ones will actually shrink. You can see that, well, I don't know if you can see, because I've been looking at this for the last 5 years, But this one's kind of bled into this plot a little bit. This is kind of one of the older varieties that's not as competitive, and we're seeing it start to shrink. And over the course of, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years, that'd probably disappear altogether. And if you're on an older golf course, you might see something similar where you see kind of patches of different colors of bent grass. That's what's happening in those areas. So it's been a fun study to work on. Although it is very time consuming, I'm excited to spray it with Roundup tomorrow.